Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1439. We finished the paragraph on 1439. Yichud Kutshebrichu V'Shchinte is the headline of this section. Title: Unification of two dimensions of the divine, the transcendent Kutshebrichu Kodesh, like a Kodesh Baruch Hu Kudsha, Kodesh removed, and Shechina Shechina Mislabeshes, that manifests within existence, like V'Shachanti B'Seicham, I will reside, I will dwell among you, within you. And Adrei HaMailis, this yichud and these two levels exist as the highest levels. And he's been going from the bottom up, starting from an Atzilus. And the reason for Atzilus, because Atzilus is the perfect world, but it's a world where there's the yichud of Kutshebrichu V'Shchinte, as in the yichud of Zah and Malchus. Moving from there to Chochmah and Biy'a, then Keser and Chochmah, and all respectively, the higher level being Kutshebrichu, the lower level being Shechina. In Keser itself, in the lower level of Keser, Arich, the two levels in Arich, the Malchus of Arich, the Midas of Arich, and then the Atzmius of the Midas, as they're rooted in the Etzem HaRatzon. Then in Keser, going to Atik and Arich, with Atik being Kutshebrichu, and also fitting to the word, Hatoka, is like from the word Havdalah, Atik from the word removed, higher than, and Arichampin being Shechina. The explanation how each of the two names, each one also indicates on two levels, Atik Yemen, Arich Ampin. And finally, the last thing we learned was the yichud of Kutshebrichu V'Shchinte, and now we're talking about Ak. So just as we spoke about Malchus of Atzilus being Shechina and Zah being Kutshebrichu, and then Malchus of Keser or Arichampin being Shechina, and Zah and Midas of Keser being Kutshebrichu, same thing here in Ak, which is the first world, so to speak, the snapshot, the blueprint, that Shechina is Malchus of Ak, and Kutshebrichu is what he called first Atzmius of Ak. That was the word Atzmius Ak of B'chinas Kutshebrichu. But according to them, but even higher than that, going further, like he did with Keser, according to the Mishnas Chassidim, that says that Ak is the Arich of all worlds. So Ak in general then would be like Shechina, and Chitzenius Ak, that is, and Pnimius Ak would be Kutshebrichu. And what's Pnimius Ak? That's where the Kav is Mislabish. And then he went even further, that there's also a thing in Eitz Chaim that there's a similarity, there's a similar element of Atik above the Golgalta, the crown, the skull of Ak, and that would then be the level of Kutshebrichu. Reishis HaKav, the beginning of the Kav. So we move this all the way up to literally till the Tzimtzum, because the Kav, remember, is the first stream of consciousness flow that follows the Tzimtzum. He hasn't mentioned Tzimtzum, but that's where we've reached now. And as I explained yesterday, this isn't just semantics where you find Kutshebrichu and Shechina in many places. It's actually traveling inward into the very fabric and the very fiber and DNA of existence. It's almost like you would say when you want to evaluate or even correct and create deeper connections and deeper unifications. You could do it on the surface level. You could do it on the elementary level, like the elements. You could do it on a molecular level. You can do it on a cellular level. You can do it on an atomic level. You can do it on a subatomic level. It all comes down to how deep you're going. So just as an analogy that we can relate to, we're dealing with the same reality, because how deep are you going in its earliest stages of its development? I mean, when scientists are looking for the events that happen at the Big Bang, what they call, they're essentially doing the same thing. They want to recreate the environment and the ingredients, what was there when it all began. because by understanding that, you can then retrace the steps and perhaps better understand where we are today. So it's really going into the inner workings of something. Here, of course, it's in the broadest sense of the word. It's the whole Seder Shtalshlus. But what's unique here is that it's spiritual. It's a spiritual journey, meaning it's going to the spiritual roots of everything that exists, all the way down to the world of Asiya, and going as deep as we can. And with the objective of the Yichud Kutche Brichu V'Shchinta. Because remember, before all of this, Hashem Echad, everything was one seamless, unified entity. All this was not necessary. This is only because God created existence, and He wanted to create a hierarchy and a structure and an entire multitude of details, and with the mission being that our neshamas come down below to create the Yichud, which will bring us back to Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, HaMayrich Be'echad, HaEmer Yehesh Meirab, Amin Yehesh Meirab B'chol Keichei, and all that the neshamas achieve as they create these unifications through our Avodah. And in many ways, actually, when you look in Kabbalah and also Chassidus, all the mitzvahs, everything we do is considered to be yichudim, zivugim, the yachid kutche bricha v'shchinta. So that essentially, in a way, sums up all of Avodah, all mitzvahs. Shema, of course, is the epitome of the liturgy of the prayer and the verse that talks about that achdus. We'll get to that. Just giving you some of the context and placing all this in the context of Ayin Beis. So, of course, its theme is this interface and unification of all levels. So, with that, we're going to move further now, and go deeper into the kishkis, so to speak, into the inner workings of all of existence and creation and the cosmos. Before I continue, I just want to add one more thing. He called Chetzeni Yisak, was istakel baraisa ubara alma kutshabrichu istakel baraisa bara alma. So the interpretation of that is kutshabrichu is that higher level. Istakel baraisa, where does he look? He's looking to the Torah that he wrote down, which is the Chetzenius of Ak. Ak is the actual blueprint. So the architect is looking into the blueprint, which is another way of saying kutshabrichu and Shechina. That was one thing I just wanted to mention. And kutshabrichu is the kava mislabish ba'ak prim yasak. Yeah. And gam yeshlema, so that's also atik. So before I continue, if anybody wants to ask any questions about what I just said now or in general, before we go on, as I said, we're going to go deeper in. We're traveling deeper down the rabbit hole.
How could he call Teira Chitzenius Ak when we say Kutshabrich Teira is Chahu?
How could you say also Nevelis Chachma Shalmaila Teira? How do you explain that? Because as the Alter Rebbe says, Teira is Nosa v'Yarda v'Nislapsha. In its root, it's a Raisa v'Kutshabrich Kulachad. Correct. But then the Teira travels. The Teira travels to the point that it's going to be Biy'a ala klaf. It's going to be ink on parchment or letters on luchis, on the tablets. So the Teira itself goes through the whole Ishtalshlus. That's where you have the concept of Teira Shabbatzilus and Teira B'Bria, Teira Yitzira. So when it says, so let's talk about the exact expression. Istakel baraisa bara alma. To ask the question, if Teira is one with God, why does God have to look into the Teira? Because the Eibishter is now creating. And Kavyochel, the Eibishter didn't need anything. He could have just said, poof. Why did it say Vayemer Elikim? Why not just Vayehi Eir? Because the Eibishter wanted to create existence in a structured way, in a way that we could understand. So just like Kavyochel, you have an architect that first creates a blueprint. And what's the blueprint? The blueprint is a reflection of his vision. The Torah is a reflection of the Eibishter's vision. And he's putting it down in a blueprint, which is called Chetzeni Yisak. And then he looks into it. And now we can replicate that because the hemshech of the Zohar is Kach Barnash Istakel Baraisa. That's how we also look into Torah, V'kayim Alma. And we preserve the world. He doesn't bring that here. So in other words, we have a place to look at, which is a gift. So basically, Torah is sometimes called Moshel HaKadmoni, sometimes called the Mumutza. Torah is also a Mumutza because it's the place where the Eibishter says, Eisi atem leichim, anoichi. Anon nafshi ksavis yavis. I have engraved myself in this Torah. Now you can hold the Torah and you can learn it and understand me through it. So basically, the Torah becomes a platform where Elikus, pure Elikus, meets existence. So on that first level, after the Tzimtzum, it's called Cheseni Yisak, and Kutchabrich is Takel Baraisa, and he is using that blueprint, which will become our blueprint as well. That's how I would frame it. And then the Torah will continue to travel downward, so to speak, together with Neshamas, as Neshamas come down. So like Matan Torah, the Eibishter created the world with Torah. So why is Matan Torah 26 generations later? Because the formal giving of the Torah on earth is 26 generations. But the very essence of Torah, of course, is Alpayim Shana Kadma Torah Le'elam. So you see all this, the Torah goes through all the levels. Alpayim Shana, Chachma Bina, Alev Chachma, Alev Chabina, etc., etc.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Is there any kind of mechitza or membrane, so to speak, between these various higher levels, like we saw there was between Malchus of...
Yes, the answer is yes. There are membranes everywhere.
Not just between Malchus of Atzilus and Biy'a, but there's membranes between all these other levels as well.
There's always membranes, because the membranes serve like the parsois. If you go back, well, you weren't here then, but in volume 2, there's a whole maybe 50 pages where he talks about their parsois on all the levels. Because think of it like the human body. Even though there are some major membranes, like let's say the throat or the diaphragm, and other such things, but everything is being regulated. Whenever you have a flow going from one level to the level, you constantly, there's all kinds of think of the neural activity in the brain, the neurocircuitry. How many circuits are there? And every neuron has its own so-called membrane. And because that's what you need to do in order to maintain if you want to maintain a coordinated system with billions, if not trillions of components, there's a constant need for having the flow, the regulation of the flow, and therefore all these membranes. Yeah.
Are there any details that were given prior in Ayin Beis in these 50 pages that describe the structure of the membrane, what's going on inside it?
That's what he discusses there. Yeah, in volume 2.
Oh, volume 2. What page was that again?
In volume 2? I'd have to look it up. I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, okay, that's okay. Thanks, Rabbi.
Yeah. And he's referred to the parsois before. Okay. So we continue now the new paragraph on page 1439. The pages here can be found if you want to follow the text at ayinbeis.com. So here's what he says now. Omnom, after saying now that Kutchabrich and Shechina all the way up to Atik of Adam Kadmon, there's a Ke'ein Atik, a similar level like Atik, which is the Reishis Sakav. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to broaden it out even further. Omnom, however, B'chlolos, in general, and we see here he's moving from the specific to the general. A few times he said already that even though Arich itself is Kutchabricha and Shechina, but B'chlolos, Atik is Kutchabricha and Arich is the same thing he said later with Ak, that even though Malchus of Ak is Shechina, but B'chlolos, all of Ak, Chesenius Ak, is the Shechina. So now you can see several times he's already used microcosm, macrocosm language. Just pointing that out. I've seen it already now. This is the third time. So he says, B'chlolos, if you zoom out, so to speak, and you widen the landscape and the horizon and the panorama, B'chlolos, the air in general that extends into the worlds, Hainu b'chinas hakav, the whole kav. Because what's the purpose of the kav? Is to manifest in existence, to create existence, like the paintbrush, the stylus, that laser beam, shenimshech me'ed ein sof, which is drawn from me'ed ein sof. So b'chlolos, everything that nimshech in elam is nikra gam ken shechina, is also called shechina. So if you really broaden the picture, relatively speaking, it's not just, until now we said, okay, there's a Kudsha Bricha in each level and there's a Shechina in each level. But the truth is, what does Shechina represent? The divine that manifests. So relative to Pnimius Ak, that is Cheshenius Ak. Relative to Atik, that's Arich. Relative to Zah, it's Malchus. Relative to Kesser's Chochmah, etc. But if you really think of it, the whole Kav, every that's Nimshach Be'elmis is already can be called the name Shechina. Why? Kishem Shechina, because the name Shechina al Shem Sheshechin u'mislabish b'shalamata memenu. The very name Shechina means that it's residing. It's on the name Sheshechin. It resides. It dwells. It manifests u'mislabish and gets enclosed in the level beneath it. V'hainu b'madrege shem uvdelas be'erech, which means in a level that is relatively apart from it, or else there wouldn't, or else the word Shechina wouldn't make sense. Like I mentioned, what is the statement saying? The Eibishter is Malay Kol Haaretz Kved. He fills all of existence. So what does the Migdash do? What does the Mishkan do? The Mishkan creates an environment, a very physical structure with parameters. And Eibishter says, if you build it the way I'm telling you to do it, I will now manifest in a deeper way and integrate and interact with you. More than just it is without the Mishkan. So that means immediately that Shechina indicates a type of descent or type of manifestation, type of engaging in something that initially was removed from that level. In other words, the Eibishter without the Mishkan would not have the V'shachanti b'seichem. Though obviously his presence is everywhere, but it wouldn't be in a level that we can engage with, like when Adati l'chashama, Hashem spoke to Moshe from the Kodesh Kadoshim, from the top, from the Kaperis, the covering of the ark. But Moshe, we also know he spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai. He spoke to Moshe in Mitzrayim. So what's the difference? But here it's in the level of a Shechina, Shechenes u'mislabeshes. Of course, God could speak to anyone, anywhere, but in a much more manifest way, much more internalized, integrated way. In other words, the concept of Shechina is basically divine manifesting on our terms in some way. When I say our, I mean, like he says here, B'darga, Misabish b'shalamatim imenu, v'hain madrega shem uvdelas be'erech. So b'meila, one second. So b'meila, since the Kav is already that first level that is taking the divine energy that before the Tzimtzum was Ein Sof Poshet, seamless, shapeless, and completely does not even leave room for existence. So in that context, the Kav is the first level of Shechina. And this indeed, by the way, goes back, not by the way, to the Maimer of the first Maimer of the Rebbe that I pointed out several times. And when he brings Shechina on all the levels, he says this briefly, the same idea. But remember, the Rebbe's, that first chapter, which I actually never knew until we started learning here in Ayin Beis, is really parallels very much the levels we're talking here. Here it's a little more in detail, but it's definitely a very interesting study in contrast.
Are you referring to Basi Lagani?
First Maimer the Rebbe said, chapter 1, Basi Lagani, yeah. So he brings there also about the Kav. So this just explains now that when you zoom out, so to speak, in the broader sense, the level that is Nimshach Be'elmis, which is referring to the Kav now, is also called Shechina, because that's what Shechina represents. Anyone wants to ask anything?
What's Kudsha Bricha in this level of Kav?
We're in the middle of a discussion. The Rebbe Rashab is going to explain.
Is there? You mentioned. Sorry, I don't know if you wanted to respond to Rav Shlomo.
It's probably Igla Godol.
Why do we have to guess? The Rebbe Rashab is in the middle of speaking. Let's just hear what he has to say. I'm not.
Sorry, Rabbi. We're excited about the class.
I get excited too, Reb Moshe.
No, there's nothing wrong getting excited, but we're literally in the middle of this. He's just beginning. Does anyone have a question what we learn now, not what we haven't learned yet?
I have a metadata question. You mentioned the first time you mentioned how when Basi Lagani, how is a muscle, or basically a synopsis of what we're learning now. You said maybe you'll teach us, you'll go there and show us how that's the case. Is it possible at some point before we leave this topic of Yichud Shechina Kudsha Bricha that you would do that, show us that analysis?
I'll see. Let me see. Firstly, I think it's pretty clear, and you don't even need my help here. You could just look it up. You'll see it's one page there, first page in the mimer, and it's pretty self-explanatory once you learn Ayin Beis. But I'll see. Let's see where it goes here. Let me finish this, and we'll see then. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. The dihine, because now. So let me explain what's Islapshas HaPartzufim. As again, there's the Rebbe Rashab is referring many times to terms and ideas that either assumes that we've learned them already, or it's earlier in Ayin Beis, which it is. So some of you may recall that when we talk about the actual infrastructure of the cosmic order, sometimes the structure we call Nakuda, Sphira, Partzuf. It's really just three ways of explaining the structure of something. Nakuda means a point. There's a point. Sphira is a full-blown personality characteristic, like Chochmah, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, so on. Partzuf is a composite of several spheres. So, for example, a human being, the full human being, is not a nakuda, it's made up of nakudas, which in turn shape the spheres, and which in turn shape the partzufim. So, a partzuf literally also means a face. So, when you look at a human face, for example, someone will say, "What does a face consist of?" It's not one feature. There are eyes, there's a nose, there's a mouth, there are ears, there's cheeks, there's a forehead, and more. So a partzuf is a combination of elements. So essentially, it's similar to when we say in mathematics, you say a point, a line, and a plane, which really is the idea of nakuda, nakuda kav shetach, but in different terms, nakuda sphira partzuf. So partzufim is essentially in Kabbalah talks about 5 partzufim, like the partzuf of Keser, the partzuf of Chochmah and Bina, the partzuf of Zah, and the partzuf of Malchus. I actually counted 4, but it could be 5 when you break it down. So not just that the spheres interact with each other, that's clear. There's Chesed Shebechesed, there's Gvura Shebechesed. There's also their structures, like Zah is a partzuf. The partzuf of Zah, that's its full name. Because Zah Ampin, is not one sphere. It's Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. Arich Ampin is a partzuf. Atik is a partzuf. Higher level ones. So when he says the words Islapshas HaPartzufim Zebezeh, he's basically saying that these mini structures, mini composites, they also interact with each other. Just like, for example, the head interacts with the torso and with other partzufim in the human body. So that's just explanation. So he's saying like this.
Why is Zoh? I understand. You have 6 different things, but in Arich, why is this a partzuf? What's the partzuf different from Sphira?
Arich is a whole, has 10 spheres in it. What do you mean? Arich is not just a sphere, it has 10 spheres in it. And so, anyway, let's not go there. It's completely not relevant to this discussion. I just explained partzufim. You want to go to partzufim? Different? I just explained a sphere is one entity. Chochmah, Bina, a partzuf is a combination of entities. Like a face. Eyes, nose, mouth, and so on. And a sphera is a combination of nakudas. Okay. Okay.
Perhaps the rabbi's asking, the student's asking, when you compound the sphirot to make some sort of partzuf, is there a compounding effect? In other words, it has new qualities beyond the sum of the components individually.
Okay, so my response would be, if that's what the question is, then go to Sefer Lakutim Erech Partzuf and do research to find out what parts. Since it's not the theme of Ayin Beis, I only came to explain the words because it says Islapshas Partzufim. I wanted to explain it, but I don't want to definitely digress now into a discussion on Partzufim. It's not really not part of the theme here. There are other places in Ayin Beis where it discusses at length. Again, in volume 2, there's a whole discussion on the Kudah Sphira Partzuf as well.
Okay.
So it's a full theme, and by all means, Joe, if you really want to know, go check it out.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay.
Sorry, we're driving the rabbi crazy. Sorry.
But you're going to find I'm pretty consistent in my responses.
Yeah.
Dehine bislapshus hapatzufim zeh b'zeh. Because now in the slapshus, when the patzufim are interconnecting with each other, or manifesting with another. For example, when moichin goes into midas, and the mind is giving birth to midas, that's a slapshus of a patzuf into a patzuf. When Zah and Malchus interact, or Zah is mislabish, and like we learned earlier, that the zroyes, the arms of Arich, are the Abba ve'ima is mislabish's garments to the arms of Arich. That's a form of islapshus of a patzuf and a patzuf. So he says now, the islapshus of a patzuf zeh b'zeh, b'madregas atzilus, in the level of atzilus, ein zeh nikra Shechina. That's not called Shechina. Being that they are commensurate and they're proportionate to one another. So the fact that something manifests in another is not always means that's a Shechina. Shechina has to require some type of leap. Like he said, shemivdel is be'erech, that it's somewhat removed. So when you say chesed and gvura, for example, interact, you're not going to say that's a form of Shechina, because they are close to each other already. Yes, it's a slapshus, hiskalalus, there's different words for it. But not every interaction between two levels is called Shechina, what he's saying right now. Because they're be'erech zelazeh. Rak by slapshus habina bezah. However, where would you say the word Shechina? By slapshus, when bina goes into zah. Bina being its moichin, and zah is midas. Li is the zah gam came b'b'chinas havdalah se'erech li'ab b'chinas bina. Being that there is somewhat of a distance between zah, the midas, and bina, u'kamoy hamidas l'gaba ha'meichin. Like there's a distance between emotions compared to meichin. The meichin him la'atzmei, because meichin, you see, their personality is internal. Interest interacting with yourself. When you're in a state of moichin, and someone comes over and wants to interact with you, meaning midas, emotions are not conducive to sitting and studying or concentrating on something with your mind. Midas, on the other hand, are el azulas. The whole idea of a midah is an interaction with another. Love, reverence, respect, compassion, etc. V'chol inyan amidas who are goshas atzmei. And the whole idea of a midah, in contrast to moichin, which is not about you. Moichin is an objective reflection. That's not my interest. What is objectively true? Midas, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It's goshas atzmei. It's about what I feel, not what I know to be objectively true. What do I feel? How does it relate to me? That's what a midah means. Commission is boil, as was explained earlier. Al-kei nikra bina Shechina. That's why bina is called Shechina. Like we learned earlier, Shechina law. Because you're dealing with a level that's removed from. What's not clear to me is there it was called Shechina compared to Chachma, not compared to Midas. If I recall correctly, let me just see. I'm looking on page 1436 when he spoke about Bina. He said like this, Malchus, oh, okay. No, he did say that. Bina is called Shechina law. Al Shem Shemashchenes Gimel Reshenes Bezayin Tachtenes. Why is Bina Shechina? Because it's carrying down from the Gimel Reshenes into the Zayin Tachtenes, which is Zah. And Bina is Ikra Mokalish Talshlus. But he doesn't say there. One second, let me just see. Yeah, it needs more explanation, but he's clearly saying this. that Bina is not like the Eslapshus Patsufim Zeh B'Zeh, which are commensurate to each other. There has to be some distance here. Okay, Nikra Bina Shechina. Let me just continue reading and we'll see how he goes here. Vihi B'China Shechinti Law. This is referring back to page 1436. This is called the higher level of Shechina. The Makom Mokim Ein Zeh B'Madrega Nivdelas Mamish. And nevertheless, Shechina, the Mekol Mokim, nevertheless, even though compared to levels that are closer to each other, like in Moichin itself or Midas itself, Chesed and Gvura, for example. So Bina is relatively apart from, nevertheless, Ein Zeh B'Madreg V'Nivdelas Mamish, Nivdelas Mamish. Still, even Bina is not completely removed. Shahari Hakol, who Atzilus. Because at the end of the day, all of this is all on the level of Atzilus. So as much as, even though when you break it down, and relatively speaking, you could speak about Kudsha Bricha and Shechina, but since it's all in Atzilus, it's really not that removed from one another. Even Bina from Midas, basically. He's making a case that wherever it's more removed, there you apply Shechina even more. So even though it's true, we've been learning till here that Shechina and Kudsha Brichu and all the levels, Zoh and Malchus, Chachma Bina, in Arich, in Atik, in Ak, and so on. But he's saying, but if you really understand the meaning of Shechina, the biggest meaning of Shechina is most applicable when there's a true leap from something that's distant from one another. The case being made that ultimately the Kav is essentially like, even though he doesn't say it yet, but it's not just the Shechina, it personifies the concept of Shechina in the most powerful way because it's the biggest leap from the state before the Kav, which is before the Tzimtzum. So he's not negating anything we learn. He's just broadening the picture and explaining that when you're dealing with levels that are closer to each other, it's not as nivdelis, it's not as separate, and therefore, even though we're calling it Shechina to a certain extent, but it's not quite the same as, like he's going to say in a moment. So, because it's all Atzilus, and that's why it continues. So where do you say Ikar Shem Shechina? You just called Bina Shechina, relatively speaking, and yet it's not really the fullest manifestation of it. So he says, Ikar Shem Shechina B'chinas Malchus. The primary level of Shechina is when you talk about Malchus. Al Shem Shechina's Biy'a. Because Malchus is taking a real leap. The leap from Bina to the Midas is not quite like the jump from Malchus of Atzilus to Biy'a. Shechina's Biy'a, it manifests and resides, dwells in Biy'a. Shenivdal be'erech ma'atzilus. There, it's nivdal be'erech, it's quite a distance from Atzilus. And that's why, Shezet tzarich liyas aydei tzimtzum ve'elam. And this leap requires a tzimtzum, a diminishment and a concealment, like we've learned earlier. This needs to pierce the partition shebein Atzilus leBiy'a, because there's a fundamental partition. Atzilus and Biy'a are very different worlds. Atzilus is kuli alakus, everything is divine. Biy'a is not kuli alakus. There's already the beginnings of an independent consciousness. That's not the opposite of divine, but it's already not. It's already a yesh, a nivra, creation. Through this Tzimtzum and Helam, the piercing of the parsa, that through that, the nekuda of Malchus, that's arriving and traveling from Atzilus, that descends in Biy'a, is called now Reisha B'riya. So Malchus, which was the end, Tachtin Sheba Atzilus, has now become the Reish, the head, and the beginning of Biy'a. So that's why we talked about the two stages of Malchus. Malchus as it is in Atzilus. Then there's the Parsa. Now it pierces, and that's why Malchus is called Shechina, because it's Muvdelas Be'erech from the place it resides in, which is Biy'a.
Can I ask a question?
Let me finish this middle of the sentence, middle of sentences. I'll finish. I'll stop for questions. Remember, because I'm teaching more than one person here, I just want to make sure I get the whole idea down, and then I'll stop for questions. This is called Shechina. The Gam, and additionally, in explaining Malchus here, so one point he made was that there's a bigger leap, more of a paradigm shift. And that's where Shechina really, that's what he calls Ikar Shem Shechina, is there when there's a real leap like that. Additional point is that the Oyer Be'etzem, the purpose of the Oyer in the first place was L'hoyer Ulishkim B'tachtenim, was to radiate and to dwell in Tachtenim. So you talk about Biy'a to for example, Biy'a to Zah, or levels within Atzilus itself, there, it's necessary for the functionality of the structure of Atzilus. But if you want to fulfill the purpose of existence, it's Dafke B'tachtenim. And that is a big leap. So in other words, the name Shechina applies, like when we say V'shachanti b'seichem, which he's going to explain soon. That's where it applies most. Shechina is not, in other words, even though you can use the word, relatively speaking, in higher levels, where one level is interacting with other, if the leap is big enough, but the real purpose and meaning of Shechina was that the Eibishter wanted to dwell in something that's completely tachtenim. So in other words, where would you use primarily Shechina is when you're really capturing the idea that a level of the divine is manifesting in much lower levels, not within its own internal structure. So that's what he's adding now, which I think is a critical point. In other words, why did Eibishter make Shechina in the first place? It wasn't made for Biy'a to enter into Zah, even though you can use the word Shechina there, and that's why we call it Shechin Te'ilah. So the fact that he described all these levels before is not in any way minimizing that. It still stands. There's Kudsha Brich and Shechina on all levels. But if you want to really understand Shechina in the fullest sense of the word, it's really the purpose where God says, I want to create another reality where I want to dwell there. Like when we say Dira B'tachtenim, same idea of Shachanti B'seichem, Shechina B'tachtenim. That's where the real name Shechina really becomes fully relevant and powerful. And that, again, will help understand the Maimer Bas Lagani of the Rebbe, because that's its central theme. There's Der Ashvi that will bring the Shechina down below, like Moshe was the Der Ashvi that built the Mishkan, which is not just bringing it down from one heaven to the next, like Avram Avinu did and Yitzchak, but it's actually bringing it down from heaven onto earth, which is the ultimate real. In other words, the fact that the previous generations brought the Shechina down on one level to the next was an important achievement. It's stepping stones. But the real goal is that it should be a Shechina, it should be V'shachanti b'seichem on earth. Had Moshe not built the Mishkan, God forbid, the kavanah would not be fulfilled. It's not just enough to bring it down from the seventh heaven to the sixth heaven or to the fifth heaven, but the real Shechina means coming down into this existence. So this way, so what he explained now, to sum up what we just learned, this omnom that began the paragraph is coming to explain that after everything we've learned, let's now really understand that Shechina applies to the whole concept of coming into existence. And Adrabah, that is the main definition of Shechina. So both a big leap, but like he said, V'gam now, the purpose, L'hoyer Ulishkim B'tachtenim. So we're not finished yet. He's going to now explain this further, but since it's a period, I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
Right. So my question was one over terminology. I mean, this is all very clear to me in terms of the concept, but he says that here you call Malchus the Shechina, but Malchus is the source of from which there is the Shechina B'tachtonim. I mean, you say Mamish Shechina B'tachtonim, so you would think Malchus of Atzilus is Kudsha Brichu, relatively speaking, and the Shechina that dwells in Biy'a, that comes down, that divine presence that is more imminent in Biy'a, that's the Shechina. So I'm a little confused about the terminology.
No. So if you go back a few pages, he made it very clear. Let's just go back. You've asked me a similar question. Let's go back to the example he gave. For a king to choose, he wants to be a king over a nation, the king being Malchus of Atzilus, and the nation being Biy'a, he has to go through very big Tzimtzum. In other words, the king himself is the Moichin and the Midas and all the higher spheres, the 10, what he called the test spheres that are above Malchus. The only thing now you have left in Malchus is Les Lamagam Al Klum, nothing of its own, like moon. And this is now a diminished state. So Kutsha Brichu is the Melech as he is for himself, without this diminishment. Malchus is now the only thing that we have left is that he's going to be a Melech on an Am Nifred, a Melech B'layam, on separate entities that are not like himself. Because it's not, a Melech is not a king on his children, on his family, it's on strangers. So Malchus, therefore, is the place where the Eibishter has now manifested himself in the form of Shechina, and that Shechina can now descend into Biy'a to reside among the people, or like he says here, V'shechanti b'seich.
Thank you.
Now, if you go back, that's what he explained when he explained this pretty relatively, he gave a whole explanation why Malchus is called Shechina. Go back to top of 1436. He even talked about Pnimius Malchus, whether Pnimius Malchus could be called Shechina. Yeah. But Yossi Ben Habonis, that Malchus goes down Ben Habonis. And that's the...
He said
Shechina refers to, remember, Shechina refers to godliness. Shechina does not refer to the people. It's godliness that's manifesting. V'shachanti, Shechina is manifesting among us. So what level is that? That's Malchus manifesting among Biy'a, within Biy'a.
Fair enough. Thank you again.
Okay.
He said Dino is called Shchinto Ilo because it's really not such a separation because everything is in Atzilus. Shchinto Ilo means that it's not real Shchinto, it's higher, not exactly Shchinto.
That's more or less what he said, yeah.
Thank you.
And if you want more on that, you have to go back to 1436 as well, where he spoke about it. Okay. Ukamoy Kain, continuing on. Ukamoy Kain hamshach b'atzilas me'erein sof baruch hu. So just as we just explained how it is with Malchus, that Shechenes u'mislabeshes b'tachtenim in Biy'a, so too the hamshach b'atzilus from higher, from erein sof baruch hu, from the infinite divine, nikra Shechina, is also called Shechina. Val derech she'amar HaKosov, similar to what the pasuk says, V'shechanti b'seicham, I will reside b'seicham among you, shu b'seich kol echad ve'echad miYisrael, which means within each single person of Israel, nikra zeh b'shem Shechina. That's called Shechina. Let's see where he's going with this. It's the middle of the sentence. Lies, being the Hagam Sha'odam Atan Al Shem Adam Le'elyon, even though a human being is already called Adam Le'elyon. That's why Odam Atam. You are Odam. Why Odam? One of the meanings of Odam is Adama, from the word Dimyan. Adama, like you're similar to the above. Even before the V'shechanti b'seicham. Im kol zehu rak Adam Le'elyon. Nevertheless, it's only Adam Le'elyon Levad. It's only similar to. V'loi kamoy Elyon Tav. It's like a similar, like in the likeness of. You say something is similar to another, but it's not like the Elyon. It's not Elyon itself. Kamoy Elyon. Ubichdeishi nimshach me'erein sof. Because the obvious question is, what did this Mishkan accomplish? If every human being is created in the divine image, and Odamatam Adam Elyon, so already a keli, so to speak, or at least a likeness, a reflection of the divine. They're saying, no, that's not enough. We're talking about much deeper than that. If you want to draw down, in order to draw down from infinite divine to bilti bal gvul, where there's no limits and no definitions. Bal gvul means no finite element. Bal tachlis, and without any end or without any definition, b'neshamas Yisrael, to draw down from Erein Sof, bilti bal gvul and bilti bal tachlis, which is completely different level, the divine, the unfettered divine, into neshamas Yisrael, shenislapshu begufim bal gvul, that elikus should manifest and getting clothed in bal gvul, in finite bodies, That's not possible only through a tzimtzum, because it will basically blow all our circuits. Bli gvul and gvul don't meet. So the only way is through a tzimtzum. Ukamoi, like when we say tzamtzum shchinte ben shnei badei ha'oren, that the Eibishter diminished or concentrated his Shechina between the two rods on the ark, because it says the Eibishter spoke to Moshe, as I said before, ben shnei badei ha'oren, from the kaperis, from the cover between the two. So the question is, what does that mean? The Eibishter is everywhere, and he can speak everywhere. So the answer is, tzamtzum shchinte, took a Shechina and in some way concentrated it, that it should focus and the sound, the voice should come from between the two rods, the two handles, the two badei ha'oren. The b'chdei she'yeh agili b'mokim mugbal. Why is that the case? Because in order for there to be a gili in a defined space, in a limited space, that's why it says tzimtzum shchinte, tzamtzum shchinte. It's through a tzimtzum. U'kamoy kain, so too, b'chdei liyas hagili b'neshamas Yisrael, for there be the gili of the Shechina b'neshamas Yisrael, of Eid Ein Sof. Shein rak b'chinas adama le'elyon. The neshamas on their own, they're only adama, they're only similar to, but not actually it. And specifically as when they manifest inside of a body, so that even limits them even more. So you need to have a tzimtzum to concentrate and to channel that energy into that limited space or limited entity. Al-Kain, and therefore, and that's why the energy, or the divine energy that resides and dwells and mislabish and manifests in them is called b'shem Shechina. So you see that Shechina is directly associated with that tzimtzum. With that tzimtzum, that's where Shechina makes sense. Because Shechina is essentially the divine as it's in a state of concentration or channeling, as we're discussing right now. Well, let's continue. V'chein hagili b'atzilus. So this also applies to the Gili and Atzilus. Sanikra Adam. So now remember he said before that the idea of Shechina, first he applied Malchus into Biy'a. He said, but the same thing can be said about Atzilus, l'gabe Eid Ein Sof. Why? Because Atzilus is called Adam. Adam le'elyon. Next page. Al Shem Adam le'elyon Kaneda. Atzilus, like Neshamas, is called Adam le'elyon. Top of page 1440. The Mekom Mokim Urab B'chinas Adam levad. Which means as much as Atzilus is a divine world, but it's only Adama, meaning similar to. So Nikra Er V'Agili b'Shem Shechina. I'm sorry, Nikra Er V'Agili b'Shem Shechina. The Er and Gili therefore is called b'Shem Shechina, right? Harikadei Lias Atzilus b'Chinas Atzilus Ha'elyon Ef Shekima Kiim Shahoyet Tzimtzum B'Tchila. So therefore, Atzilus, for it to be Atzilus, as high as it is, you need to have first a Tzimtzum, that he's now referring to the Tzimtzum Arishan clearly, that Tzimtzum, that he diminished, Vesilik Eirei Al Atzad, Eirei HaGodl Al Atzad, that's a language from Eitz Chaim, that he removed, really means he concealed his energy to the side. That's the idea of removing or concealing the core energy. And after the tzimtzum comes the kav. So this hamshacha, what is the hamshacha of the kav? Is in order to be able to draw the energy now into an existence that were there no tzimtzum that would never be able to tolerate or contain that energy. Through the tzimtzum, a space, the mokim poni, that empty space remained, bli gilui klal, that had no revelation at all, because it was a complete concealment. And through the kav, the Eid Ein Sof radiated, meaning the kav draws it down, channels that energy down. Behind the commission is Barliel, the klol is gili erzer, Like we learned earlier, that this Gilui is not to reveal the etzem of the Eibishter, because that's been concealed. But rather to radiate in the area which has now been diminished, the Tzimtzum. So the Kav is not coming to reveal the highest levels of the divine, it's coming to, you use the example of the teacher and the student, that the teacher concealed his brilliance, and now he's transmitting in order to communicate to the student on the level of the student. And that's the meaning that he removed the Eretz Musay. That's the Eir, it's in a state of Ein Sof. So Hashem concealed basically his core essence and revealed the Kav and allows the Kav to enter in order to radiate the level that now can receive a diminished form of light, which is the Kav. So based on this radical leap, this paradigm shift that he just described, just like he said before about Malchus, from Atzilus to Biy'a, even more so, the Kav, and because of this, its primary name is Shechina, al shem sheshechin mislabish b'mokam ha'mitzumtzum l'hayreisei. Because it's named after the fact that it is manifesting and drawing down in the mokim ha'mitzumtzum should be mislabish the l'hayreisei, to illuminate it. So where's the ultimate element of Shechina is dafka in the Kav, or vice versa. The Kav's primary name is Shechina for this reason. More than all the other levels we learned, because all the other levels is definitely a form of Shechina, like he explained. But the real real purpose of Shechina, like we said, and where is when there's the most radical leap of all, and to fulfill the kavanah of bringing it into Tachtonim. And who does that? That's the Kav. The Kav is the first revelation following the great Tzimtzum, like he just elaborated. I know there's a lot of details he said, and I'm going to go over it more in detail. I just wanted to finish the whole sentence, not just leave it hanging. And this Kav descends and evolves, like chain after chain. It continues to go downward, spiral downward, until its reflection radiates. He's bringing us back to the Mishkan, between the two rods of the ark, and within each person, so it's the Kav, essentially, that really creates this situation that ultimately will lead to the Shechina manifesting in the ark and ultimately manifesting in each one of us. While all the other levels of Shechina we learned definitely play their role in that particular department, their particular level and process. But it's the Kav that ultimately captures the most powerful element of Shechina, because it takes an Erein Sof that's completely removed and allows it to come to manifest within existence. And from there, it ultimately evolves into V'shchanti B'seicham in the Mishkan as we know it. So a lot of it is said here, but that's the central theme. I wanted to just get the main point. Down, so we have at least the picture. And then we have to go back and somewhat unpack the details here. But that's what he said here. I just want to see one thing here. Yeah. So basically, the Amshachah from Atzilus, from Erein Sof, the first level that really achieves that is the Kav. But obviously, we understand the Kav goes into Ak, and Ak goes further down all the way into Keser, Atik, Arich, and all the levels we spoke about. But the Kav now has become the central location where he's using the word Shechina, the most prominent fashion. Okay, so let me stop here and let me stop any questions. It's not finished yet. I see that he's going to speak more about this Kav and bring it back to everything we learned before. So some of your questions may be addressed in the next section here in Ayin Beis. But go ahead. Anyone wants to say it? No questions? Okay, interesting. Okay, so then I think we'll stop here.
It's an interesting question. I mean, he's suggesting that the primary or the best illustration or the ultimate illustration of Shechina is between Malchus of Atzilus and Biy'a, because of the radical leap or dissension that occurs there. On the other hand, the most radical leap or dissension is from Atzmus to Makom Panui, from all.
I wouldn't use the word
being,
Atzmus, from Erein Sof.
From Orin Sof into a vacuum, into that which lacks it, essentially, is mostly devoid of it, except for the Rishimo, as we know. So that, I mean, it's interesting. It's a little unclear. He's saying kind of both, actually, here.
This
the Kav serves that purpose, right?
So I've a number of times explained that this is microcosm, macrocosm. Remember, Atzilus the Klolos is Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and Ak is Biy'a the Klolos. So it's essentially the same idea. The Malchus of Atzilus is obviously the parsa between Atzilus and Biy'a is not as powerful as the Tzimtzum Arishin. But at times in Chassidus, they are compared to one another because it's like a microcosm, macrocosm. The point is that, yes, the biggest leap is after the Tzimtzum Arishin, that's for sure, the Kav. But similarly is what happens in Malchus of Atzilus and to Biy'a, basically.
Got it. Thank you very much.
I would think that the ultimate expression or manifestation of Shechina is not from Orein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum to the Kav after the Tzimtzum, but it would be from all these spiritual levels, including Orein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum and a Kav and a Atzilus and Biy'a and Yetzirah and Asiyah, to Olam Hazeh Agashmi, Shechanti B'Teicham B'toch, a physical world, which is the most unique, would seem to me, the most unique change, the most powerful change from the whole, the whole state of Ishtalshalos.
And you can't figure out the answer to that question? You can't figure out the answer to that question based on what he said here?
No.
Because it would not be possible to come into this world if there was no Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is what allows this world to be, ultimately. So he's explaining, that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying, Shechanti B'Seicham is possible down here because the Kav is the Shechina that the diminished air is able to then travel step by step, come all the way down to this world. So the whole concept of this world is only possible because of the Tzimtzum Arishin. That's what all of Kabbalah and Chassidus teaches. Without the Tzimtzum Arishin, there's no space for anything. That's the biggest leap, is from Einoid Mulvadei, that there's only divine consciousness, to allowing space for an independent consciousness. Then it's a matter of going level by level until it gets to this world.
But in this world of Olam Asiyah Gashmi, we would think that from Malchus from the Zah of Olam Asiyah into Malchus of Asiyah, or into a physical situation.
That's the last step of a process that began with the Tzimtzum Arishin.
But it's the whole purpose. It's the
and that's the purpose of the Tzimtzum Arishin. I see you don't. I mean, okay, we're going in circles here. I mean, without the Tzimtzum, you don't have that. I mean,
I understand that you don't. You need the Kav. You need that Tzimtzum Rishon to
not just you need it. Without it, there's no existence. Period. There's no everything you just spoke about. There's no concept of Biy'a, Yetzirah, Asiyah, Gash, nothing without a Tzimtzum. So everything is in the Tzimtzum lies that purpose, that there should be a Tachtenim that would ultimately, and it would be the Shechina, V'Shechanti B'Seich.
Rabbi Eliezer, maybe I can take a crack at this. For the Tzimtzum Arishon, you have the fundamental distinction between God and other. There's no such thing as other before Tzimtzum Rishon. Now you're making an argument that Olam Hagashmi is just so radically different than what we consider Elikus. In that sense, it seems like a more radical jump. But the most radical jump is the very distinction between God and other. Is that helpful?
Well, the other there is still, it's or, right? Kav is or. I don't know about the consciousness of the Kav. Rabbi Jacobson had used the term once about consciousness up there, but I don't know. It's I would think that the ultimate one would be, especially since the whole purpose of this whole Hishtalshalos from Aliyas Ratzon from Atzmas is down in this physical world, which is such a dramatic change that it would seem
Listen,
because that is
you're saying the same thing, and I'm going to say the same thing again. I think you're missing the major point. Now, you just dismissed as Kav being Oyer. He's saying, no, that is completely not about Etzem. God is now no longer the ultimate and exclusive entity. So what you're doing is you're minimizing the power of Ened Mulvade. You know what Ened Mulvade means? That there is nothing but God. As soon as there's another consciousness, even Oyer is a bigger leap than Ruchnius to Gashmis. Just know that.
Okay, that's an interesting statement. To me, I always thought that the Gashmis was the biggest leap. I hear what you're saying, but okay, that's I have to think about it.
What's really wonderful, I was just commentary here, is that we've been through so many different subtopics, subchapters. I think, I mean, you'll have to say, but we talked a lot about the Kav in Biy'a Beis, and second division of Ayin Beis, volume 2. And we haven't really talked about the Kav that much for quite a while, but he's now bringing us back to you may call the fundamental structure of the Hishtalshalos. And he's gone through so many details. And now that we come back to the Kav, there's so much more richness in understanding this Hishtalshalos that he's essentially, pardon the pun, descended into these details, the weeds, if you will. But because of that, we have such a more beautiful garden that we understand this channeling of Elikus into reality. It's a work of art. I mean, what he did here intellectually is a work of art.
Okay, well said. I'll just add one more thing to the conversation with the Eliezer. I mentioned before the fact that Avram or Yitzchak or Yaakov and all the generations bring the Shechina from Rekiah Shvi to Rekiah Shishi, like he explains in Bas Legani, is not the ultimate goal until the Shechina comes down on earth, which is when Moshe built a Mishkan. Or in our generation, actual Gula Amitis Vashlema with the third Beis Hamikdash on earth. So we all understand that the ultimate Shechina is coming to earth. That's not a question. That's the pasuk. The only place you find the word v'shachanti b'seichem is in the Mishkan Gashmi. You don't find it elsewhere in the Torah. It always refers to the Mishkan Gashmi. So that's maybe that is. I thought it was self-understood, but I'm just stating that's a given that the Mishkan, the real Shechina, is down here on earth. That's the whole purpose.
That's what I was referring to.
Hold on, but you didn't finish my sentence. Let me finish the sentence. That's the pasuk. We don't need that. What do you think? The Rebbe Shabbos himself is the one that brought this, and he even said earlier, he said the words, however, if you want to understand how that's possible, first of all, how existence is possible, and then how do you bring bli gvul into gvul? How do you bring, like he said earlier, how do you bring bli gvul into gvul? So there you must have understanding of the Tzimtzum and the Kav. So the Tzimtzum and the Kav are essentially the dynamics that allow for the Shechina to come down to earth. First of all, to create earth, and second of all, to manifest in earth. So when the Eibishter resides in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan, you know what's happening? The Kav is manifesting in the Mishkan. However, it goes through Hishtalshalos, like he said, Kav Nishtalshal bein b'shnei badei aron. So it's the same thing. You're pushing the Kav to some type of back somewhere up in heaven. The Kav is right here, right now. It's just in a very diminished form. But the Kav and the Tzimtzum are not up in some celestial level. These are realities that define existence as we speak. If the Kav and Tzimtzum would cease to be right now, would be no existence. And the same thing the other way around. Without the Kav and the Tzimtzum and Kav, you would never have a Mishkan and V'shachanti b'seichem. So that's the etzem meaning of Shechina. Technically speaking, yes, it manifests in this world, and that's what means V'shachanti b'seichem. But the Rebbe Rashab, what he's doing here is explaining the dynamics that allow that to happen and why and how it's happening.
There's no question, my question was obviously the Tzimtzum Rishon was the greatest Tzimtzum of all of them. Because as you said today, we need a Tzimtzum for Shechina. It's because it's a radical descent, so to speak, into next level. But what I was saying is that it seems like to me that the Tzimtzum, that radical descent into other, as Yitzhak said, the sense of other, these are all huge Tzimtzum. I mean, they're all important steps.
Okay, I must say, I don't feel that you heard what I just said. What should I tell you? I don't think you heard what I said right now. You're making it like a competition between physical world and the Kav and Tzimtzum. I'll tell you, it's not a competition. It's the same thing. You're making it sound like, okay. V'shachanti b'seichem is the pasuk in Chumash that talks about the physical Mishkan on earth. You think the Rebbe Rashab is negating that? Is saying, no, it's the Kav, it's not the Mishkan on earth. Is that what you think he's saying?
No, of course not. But so, I mean, that's what I was trying to understand. That's what I was trying to understand.
So, so he's explaining how the process of how that happens.
Okay. It's food for thought. Food for thought. That's all. I'll have to think about it.
I wanted to ask a question.
Shechina refers to the divine that manifests in existence. The Kav is the ultimate carrier of that experience.
I wanted to ask a question to look at this from a different angle, literally upside down. In the terms of Rutzo, when you talk about the Inyan of when you're reaching up, instead of we're talking about from Lamayla Lamata, but if you talk about Lamata Lamayla, you talk about the required being Bittul B'Mitziyah. So you have to essentially be Mevatel, the level you're on, in order to arrive at the next level up. So much so that it's almost like the prior level didn't exist if you want to experience the next level up. So then how do we reconcile, if that's true, which makes perfect sense in terms of divinity and Elikus, how do we reconcile this notion that there's that the divinity in its most ultimate form, right, we use Ein Sof above, before the Tzimtzum, Arishon, then gets Mitzamsam to the point where nevertheless it ultimately dwells, it manifests quite presently, well, in the Mishkan, for example. So you still have a manifestation, and is what I'm saying. It's not bittul, it's not mevutal. I mean, maybe it is, but it's still. You understand the question? On the one hand,
no.
Going from you don't understand the question.
No.
Well, okay. If we go from the lowest level to the highest level, that's an infinite degrees of elevation, and in each level you have to be bittul b'mitzias to get to the next one. So as you're descending, you would think there are infinitely large leaps in degradations of if you will, lahabdi. I mean degradation. I mean like a diminution of Elikus.
Are you asking are you asking how you grow and reach higher levels than the Tzimtzum? Is that what you're asking?
No, it's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if going from bottom to top requires infinite amounts of bittul. So that means as you compare the very top to the very bottom, there's like an arc. Really at times infinity. There's really no relationship, if you will, the level of Elikus that let's say we're living with right now.
So what's the question?
Well, we're talking about V'shachanti b'soicham, that Elikus is going to dwell amongst us. But what I'm saying is that these different levels of dissension, there's such a radical degradation or diminution of Elikus. What's left when it gets to the bottom? Do you see? But the whole time.
So basically, you're saying, you understand? Isn't there a thing called Avodas Ha'adam where we continue to grow and expand our containers, like a student that first learns Aleph Beis and then he learns more and more and expands, and then transforms themselves mutfa, murgish, muskel. I mean, forgot all about that. I mean, the whole avodah that a person does to expand and reach highest levels of godliness even before the tzimtzum.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll stop
Thank
here.
you for addressing that.
We'll stop here. Where are we stopping? We'll stop here, top third of the top page, 1440. And we'll continue. We'll learn more. There's still a middle